The war was over. The stars that once burned bright with fleets and fire had now turned silent. The Varnath Empire, once the most powerful civilization in the galaxy, was nothing more than dust and memory. Their proud cities were gone, their ships shattered, and their Empress, the one they once called Mother of the Stars, sat alone in a cold human prison cell. The cell was small, made of dark metal walls that hummed quietly with the sound of energy fields. She sat on the floor, her silver armor broken, her crown taken. Her once glowing hair hung dull around her face, and her eyes that had commanded millions, now stared blankly at the wall. Outside her cell stood a single human soldier, Sergeant Daniel Reeves. Daniel was not a man of rank or power. He was just a soldier who had survived too many battles. His left arm was wrapped in a bandage, his uniform torn at the shoulder, and his eyes looked older than his age. Every night he stood watch outside the Empress's cell, hearing nothing but silence from within. At first he thought she was just another enemy, dangerous, proud, unfeeling. But day after day she sat there quietly, never speaking, never begging, never showing anger. She did not scream for mercy or curse her captors. She simply sat. There was something strange about her silence. It was not cold, it was heavy, full of grief. One night, while changing shifts, Daniel couldn't hold his curiosity anymore. He turned toward the energy field that separated them and spoke softly. "Do you ever sleep?" The Empress lifted her head slowly. Her voice, though weak, carried a tone that once commanded entire fleets. "Does sleep matter?" she said, "when there is nothing left to dream of?" Daniel froze. Her words struck him harder than he expected. She was supposed to be a monster, the reason thousands of humans had died. Yet in that moment she didn't sound like a monster at all. She sounded human. He didn't reply, but that night, as he walked back to his bunk, her words echoed in his mind. Over the next few days, Daniel began to notice small things. The way she looked at the stars through the small window. The way she touched the scar on her wrist when she thought no one was watching. There was pain there, not the pain of defeat, but the pain of loss. Everyone in the human base hated her. To them, she was the enemy, the symbol of everything cruel and heartless about the Varnath. They said she ordered attacks on human colonies, that she burned cities and enslaved survivors. But Daniel had seen the battlefield himself. He had seen both sides commit horrors. He had seen good soldiers die for bad orders. So one day he brought her a small piece of bread from the mess hall, against orders. He didn't know why he did it. Maybe pity, maybe curiosity. She looked at the bread for a long moment before taking it. "You risk punishment for this," she said quietly. Daniel shrugged. "I've had worse." For the first time since the war ended, she gave the faintest smile, small, tired but real. He stood there awkwardly. "Why do you still sit straight like that?" he asked. "You don't have to pretend anymore." The Empress lifted her chin slightly, pride flickering in her eyes. "Because they can take my crown," she said softly. "But not my dignity." Her voice was calm, but Daniel felt something move inside him. Respect. That night, he sat alone in the barracks, staring at the stars outside the window. For the first time, he wondered if mercy could exist even between enemies. And in that lonely cell, the fallen Empress of a dying empire took a small bite of human bread and whispered to herself, "Perhaps not all humans are monsters." Neither of them knew it then. But in that cold prison, a bond had begun, a bond that would change both their fates forever. The days passed slowly in the human outpost. Cold corridors, metal walls, and the distant hum of machines made it feel more like a tomb than a station. The Empress of the Varnath sat in her small cell, silent and calm as ever. Outside, Sergeant Daniel Reeves continued his duty, though his heart had begun to change in ways he didn't fully understand. He didn't see her as the enemy anymore. He saw her as a living being, broken, tired, but still proud. There was something haunting about her eyes. They carried the weight of 1,000 worlds. Every morning, Daniel brought her food and ration packs and water. At first, it was just duty. But soon he began to speak to her. Not much at first, just simple things. He told her about Earth, about oceans that smelled like salt, about rain that made the streets shimmer, about birds that sang before sunrise. He told her about the time he took his sister to see fireworks on New Year's Eve. At first, she said nothing. She only listened. But one day, while he spoke about the sound of rain, she interrupted softly. "On my homeworld," she said, "the sky glows violet before the storm. The rain is silver. It falls like music." Daniel paused. For the first time, she wasn't the Empress or the prisoner. She was just someone remembering home. From that day on, they talked a little more. He told her about human music, and she told him about Varnath songs that could calm entire cities. He told her about his childhood. She told him about the days before war, when her people lived in harmony with the stars. Each story built a fragile bridge between them, one word at a time. But kindness never goes unnoticed. The other soldiers began to whisper. "Reeves is getting too soft," one of them said. "He's feeding the alien," another mocked. "What's next, a love story?" Daniel ignored them. But deep inside, he knew they were watching. His commanding officer, Captain Harlow, called him in one evening. "You're spending too much time near her, Sergeant," he said sternly. "She's not a guest. She's a war criminal." Daniel didn't argue, but before leaving, he said quietly, "She's also alive, and that should mean something." Harlow frowned. "Compassion will get you killed, Reeves. Remember that." Back at the cell, Daniel found the Empress sitting quietly, her eyes fixed on the stars beyond the small window. He could tell she knew something was wrong. "They don't trust you anymore," she said softly. He gave a small laugh. "They never really did." She looked at him with sadness. "You should not speak to me. It will cost you everything." Daniel leaned against the wall outside her cell. "Maybe," he said, "but I'm tired of a war that never ends. I just want to remember what kindness feels like." The Empress stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly she placed her hand on the cold glass between them. For a heartbeat, Daniel did the same, his hand mirroring hers through the invisible wall. For the first time, she whispered his name. "Daniel," he blinked in surprise. "You know my name?" She gave a faint smile. "I listen when you speak." That small moment, two enemies touching hands through glass, carried more truth than 1,000 treaties. From then on, Daniel made sure she never went hungry. He brought her fresh water, sometimes even a small flower from the hydroponic garden. Once he brought her a tiny old music player, and for a while the sound of an old earth melody filled her silent cell. It was a simple act. But for her, an Empress abandoned by her people, it meant everything. And though she never said it aloud, each night she prayed silently, in her ancient tongue. "May the stars protect the human who remembers mercy." Neither of them realized that their fragile bond would soon be tested in the cruelest way, because in war, kindness was the most dangerous rebellion of all. The sky outside the space outpost was filled with endless stars, but inside everything felt heavy and tense. The humans had won the war, but peace had not come. There were whispers of secret orders, of quiet executions, the kind no one talked about. Sergeant Daniel Reeves didn't want to believe it, but that morning he received the message that made his heart stop. Transfer order. Prisoner 001V, the Varnath Empress. To be moved to Station Epsilon, termination to follow after transfer. Authorization. High Command. He stared at the screen for a long time. His chest felt tight. Termination. They used that word so easily, like it meant nothing. But he knew what it meant. They were going to kill her, quietly. No trial, no witnesses, no dignity. That night when he brought her food, his hands trembled slightly, the Empress noticed. Her golden eyes studied him carefully. "You are troubled," she said softly. "Something has changed." Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't meet her eyes. She took a slow breath. "They are going to end me, aren't they?" Her calm tone broke something inside him. He didn't know how she guessed, but she was right. "They called it a transfer," he whispered. "But it's not." The Empress nodded slowly as if she had expected it all along. "Then my end will come as theirs did, in silence." Daniel stepped closer to the glass between them. "No, not like this." She tilted her head slightly, surprised. "You would defy your own kind for me?" He swallowed hard. "You're not my enemy anymore." That night he made his decision. Daniel worked alone in the shadows of the outpost. He had served long enough to know every security code, every blind spot in the cameras. He hacked into the main grid and set the system for a 30-second power reset. It wasn't much, but it would be enough to open one cell door. Hers. He gathered what little supplies he could. 2 rations, a pistol, a medical kit, and an old cargo ship access card. His heart raced as he slipped through the quiet halls. Every step felt heavier than the last. When he reached her cell, she was waiting, as if she knew he would come. "You will lose everything," she said quietly. "I already did," Daniel replied. "Now I just don't want to lose what's right." He pressed a code on the control panel. The lights flickered, alarms blared for a moment. Then the energy field vanished with a soft hiss. For the first time, the Empress stepped out of her cell. She was weak, her body thin and tired, but her presence still felt powerful. She looked at him with gratitude and sadness. "You shame your own people with kindness," she said softly. "Then I'm proud of that," Daniel replied. They ran through the corridors together. Sirens screamed, soldiers shouted in confusion. Daniel fired warning shots as they raced toward the hangar. The old cargo ship sat waiting, its engines cold. "Get in," he yelled. She hesitated, looking back at the alarms flashing red. "If they catch us, they'll kill you." Daniel smiled faintly. "Then let's make sure they don't." The ship's engines roared to life. The hangar doors opened, and within seconds they shot out into the cold emptiness of space. Behind them, the outpost guards shouted and fired, but it was too late. The small ship vanished into the sea of stars. Inside the ship, silence filled the cabin. The Empress sat in the co-pilot seat, breathing heavily. She looked at Daniel, the human who had just risked everything for her. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why do you care what happens to me?" Daniel stared out the window, his face calm but his voice shaking. "Because I've seen enough death to know mercy is rarer than victory." The Empress turned away, her eyes glistening with tears she refused to show. "You are not like the others," she whispered. "Perhaps humanity still has hope." Outside, the stars stretched endlessly before them. 2 souls, once enemies, now fugitives bound by a fragile, unspoken trust. And for the first time since the war began, both the soldier and the Empress felt something they had almost forgotten: freedom. The stolen cargo ship drifted quietly through the darkness of space. Its engines hummed weakly, and its lights flickered like dying stars. Inside, the Empress of the fallen Varnath Empire sat in silence, her once shining armor replaced with an old military jacket that Daniel had given her. For the first time in her life, she was no longer surrounded by servants or guards. There was no throne, no crown, no command, only the hum of the ship, the cold metal floor beneath her, and the steady voice of one human soldier who refused to abandon her. Daniel Reeves sat at the controls, his eyes fixed on the star map flickering on the screen. "We're heading toward the edge of the neutral zone," he said quietly. "If we make it that far, they'll stop chasing." The Empress didn't answer. Her gaze was lost in the stars outside. "You speak as if we still have a chance," she said softly. "You do not understand how far my enemies reach." Daniel gave a tired smile. "I don't care how far they reach. As long as you're alive, we keep moving." There was a long silence between them. The Empress turned her head slightly, studying him. His uniform was dirty, his face pale from exhaustion. Yet there was something unbreakable in his eyes. He had already lost everything: his home, his comrades, his faith in war. And still he chose to protect her. "Why risk everything?" she asked again, her voice almost a whisper. Daniel didn't look at her. "Because I made a promise to myself a long time ago," he said. "If I ever saw someone drowning, even an enemy, I'd reach out a hand." Her lips trembled slightly, but she looked away before he could see. Days turned into weeks. The ship was old and the supplies were running low. Sometimes Daniel went without eating so she could have his share. When she noticed, she grew angry. "You cannot keep giving me your food," she said firmly one night. Daniel chuckled. "I can't let my passengers starve. Bad for morale," she frowned. "You are a fool." "Maybe," he said softly, "but I'm your fool now." For a moment she stared at him, then turned away quickly to hide the small smile that appeared on her face. The journey wasn't easy. They faced storms of cosmic radiation, systems that failed mid-flight, and strange alien patrols that almost spotted them. Every danger brought them closer. When the engine broke down near a lifeless moon, the Empress helped him repair it. Her delicate hands, once used to command fleets, now worked beside his and covered in grease and dust. As they worked, she whispered, "Do you hate me for the war?" Daniel paused, tightening a bolt. "I hate the war," he said. "Not you," she looked down. I gave the orders that destroyed your people. And I followed orders that destroyed yours, he replied quietly. Maybe we're both guilty. Maybe that's why we understand each other. The Empress said nothing more. But when the engine finally came back to life, she looked at him with something new in her eyes, not pity, not pride, but respect. That night, as they drifted quietly among the stars, Daniel sat by the viewport staring into the endless dark. The Empress walked over and stood beside him. You miss your world, she said softly. He nodded. Every day. But I think I'd miss this too if it ended. She turned her head toward him, her voice barely a whisper. This? He smiled faintly. You, this journey. The silence. The peace between us. Her heart tightened in her chest. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not as an empress. Not as a ruler, but as a person. For the first time, she felt something she didn't think her kind could feel for a human. Warmth. Outside, the stars shone brighter than ever. For two lost souls, a fallen queen and a weary soldier, the universe no longer felt cold. But far behind them, in the shadows of space, human ships began to stir once more. A signal had been detected. The chase wasn't over. The silence of space was broken by a sharp rhythmic beeping sound. Daniel's eyes shot open. The ship's radar flashed red. They were being tracked. He rushed to the console, his heart pounding. No, he whispered as he tapped the controls. They found us. The Empress, who had been resting near the back of the ship, stood up immediately. Who? She asked, her voice steady but her eyes full of dread. Human fleet, Daniel said through clenched teeth. 3 interceptors and a cruiser, they're closing fast. For a moment there was only silence. Then the Empress spoke quietly. You should leave me. Daniel turned sharply. What did you just say? You heard me, she said firmly. Their target is me. If you abandon the ship now, they might let you live. Daniel laughed bitterly. You think I came all this way to just run now? Not a chance. Her golden eyes softened. You are foolish, she whispered. Yeah, Daniel replied, gripping the controls. But I'm your fool, remember? Outside, the stars flashed as missiles streaked across the darkness. The first explosion shook the entire ship, throwing them both to the floor. Shields are gone, Daniel shouted. Hold on! The ship spun violently, sparks flying from the walls. Warning lights turned the cabin red. The Empress grabbed the side panel to keep herself upright. They will destroy us, she yelled. Not if I can help it. Daniel slammed his hand against the console. The ship jerked upward, diving into the thick dust of a nearby asteroid field. Lasers followed them, bright streaks cutting through the dark. The ship shook again and again as small rocks smashed against the hull. The engine screamed. Daniel gritted his teeth, sweat running down his face. His hands were steady, but his breath came fast. Come on, hold together, baby, he muttered to the ship. Behind him, the Empress crawled toward the navigation screen. We cannot outfly them forever, she said. They will corner us. I know, Daniel said, his eyes locked on the radar. That's why you're going to leave. She froze. What? He pointed toward the small escape pod near the back of the ship. You're getting in that pod now. No, she said sharply. I will not leave you behind. He turned to face her. His expression was calm, but his voice broke slightly. If you die, everything I've done means nothing, please. Don't make my sacrifice worthless, her hands trembled. Daniel. Another explosion rocked the ship, throwing them both against the wall. Daniel's shoulder hit the metal hard, but he pushed himself up. He reached out and gently placed his hand on her arm. You gave me hope when I had none left, he said softly. Now it's my turn to give you a future. Her eyes glistened with tears. You do not understand, she whispered. My people betrayed me. My empire is gone. I have nothing left. Daniel smiled weakly. Then start again, live. For the ones who didn't. Before she could reply, he opened the pod door and pulled her close. For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the engines was the only sound. Then, without warning, he kissed her hand gently and whispered, You once ruled 1,000 worlds. Promise me you'll rule yourself now. The Empress shook her head, tears falling silently. Don't do this, he pressed the button. The pod door closed between them. Through the small window, their eyes met one last time. Her hand touched the glass. His lips formed the word she would never forget. Live free. The pod launched into the blackness of space, disappearing into the dust field. Moments later, the human missiles struck the ship. The explosion lit the stars with fire. Inside the pod, the Empress screamed his name, but there was only silence. She fell to her knees, shaking. For the first time, the mighty Empress of Varnath wept not as a ruler, but as a woman who had lost the only soul who ever saw her heart. The escape pod drifted endlessly through the dark sea of space. Inside it, the Empress sat motionless, her eyes fixed on the stars outside. Her body was weak, her mind numb. She didn't know how long she had been floating. Hours, days, or maybe weeks. Time had lost all meaning. The image of the explosion replayed in her mind again and again. Daniel's face behind the glass, the faint smile on his lips, the whisper of his last words. Live free. She pressed her hand against her heart. It hurt to breathe. The universe felt colder than ever. After what felt like forever, the pod entered the atmosphere of a quiet green planet. The small craft shook violently, flames surrounding it as it fell from the sky. With a loud crash, it landed in the middle of a thick forest. The Empress opened her eyes slowly. Pain shot through her body, but she was alive. She crawled out of the pod, gasping for air, her hands sinking into the soft soil. For the first time since her capture, she could smell life, the scent of grass, earth, and rain. She fell to her knees, her body trembling. You kept your word, Daniel, she whispered. You made sure I lived. The forest was quiet except for the sound of wind. She stood up slowly, her long silver hair tangled and her once beautiful robes torn. She was no longer the Empress of 1,000 worlds, just a broken woman on an unknown planet. But as she looked at the sky, something inside her changed. He had given his life so she could have a second chance. She could not waste it. Days passed as she tried to survive. She found shelter in the ruins of an old outpost left by another civilization. There she gathered what little food and tools she could. Each night she built a small fire and looked at the stars, whispering to them as if Daniel could hear her. You said mercy is rarer than victory, she murmured one night. You were right. But your mercy gave me strength. She began keeping a small journal, recording her memories of him, the lessons he taught her about humanity. Humans, she wrote, are strange creatures. They destroy with one hand and heal with the other. And sometimes they give everything for someone they should hate. Slowly, the Empress started to rebuild herself. Her wounds healed, and her spirit began to awaken again. She searched the forest for signs of life and found small villages. Not human, not Varnath, but peaceful people who feared her at first. She did not command them as she once commanded armies. Instead, she helped them, fixing their old machines, healing their wounds, teaching them what she knew. They began to call her the Star Lady. They didn't know who she was, and she never told them. But through her kindness, her legend began to spread. Years passed, and the Empress, once a symbol of fear, became a symbol of peace. The small world she had landed on grew into a haven for refugees from many races. No flags, no empires, only unity. And every decision she made was guided by one memory: the human soldier who believed in her when no one else did. One evening, she stood on a hill, watching the twin suns set. Their golden light painted the horizon. She closed her eyes and whispered into the wind. I kept my promise, Daniel. I lived. A tear rolled down her cheek, but this time it wasn't from sorrow. It was from gratitude. She had built something new, something he would have been proud of. That night, she went back to her quarters and took out an old metal insignia. Daniel's soldier badge, the one she had found inside the escape pod after the crash. She placed it on her desk beside a handwritten note that read, "For the human who showed me what it means to be alive." Then she looked out the window one last time before sleeping, whispering, "You are not gone, Daniel. You live through every life I save." And somewhere among the stars, the light of a distant blue planet flickered, as if the universe itself was answering her back. Many years had passed. The once lost Empress was no longer a queen of war, but a guardian of peace. The small green world where she had fallen had become a home to thousands, humans, aliens, and wanderers who had no place to go. She led them not with power but with compassion, and in her heart she always carried the memory of one man, the human soldier named Daniel. But time had not erased her longing. Every night, she still looked up at the stars, wondering if somewhere beyond the endless dark, there was still a piece of him, his soul, his courage, his light. One cold evening, The sky above her settlement burned bright as a massive ship entered the atmosphere. The people panicked, running for shelter. The Empress, calm and strong, walked outside. Her silver hair glowed softly in the light of the setting suns. The ship descended slowly, and the insignia on its hull caught her eye, a symbol she hadn't seen in years, the emblem of Earth's united human fleet. Her breath caught in her throat. Humans, she whispered, her heart pounding. The ship landed gently, and a group of human officers stepped out, led by a tall man in dark armor. The crowd fell silent as the man approached her. His helmet hid his face, but his walk, steady, purposeful, and felt familiar. "Are you?" She began softly, her voice trembling. "From Earth?" "Yes, Your Majesty," the man said, removing his helmet. "We have been searching for you." The moment his face was revealed, her world stopped. He looked older, his face marked by scars and years of struggle. But his eyes, those same blue eyes, the same warmth, the same soul she thought she had lost forever. "Daniel," she breathed, tears filling her eyes. He smiled faintly. "It's been a long journey, my Empress." For a moment she couldn't move. Her legs felt weak and her heart refused to believe. "How?" she whispered. You died." "I almost did," he said quietly. "The explosion threw me into a collapsed tunnel. The resistance fighters found me days later. I was broken. But I remembered what I promised you, that as long as I lived, you wouldn't be alone." Her hands trembled as she reached out, touching his face as if afraid he would disappear. "You came back?" she said, her voice breaking. "I told you," Daniel whispered, taking her hand gently. "Humans never abandon those they care for." The people around them watched silently. Many had heard stories of the mysterious human soldier who had once saved their Empress. And now, before their eyes, the legend had returned. That night, they sat together beneath the stars, just like old times. She listened as he told her how the war had ended, how humans had finally made peace with the Varnath Empire, after learning the truth about her survival and her work to rebuild harmony. "Your name is honored on Earth now," he said softly. "They call you the Empress of Mercy." She smiled through her tears. "You were the one who taught me mercy, Daniel." "You changed everything," he shook his head. "No, you changed me. You made me believe there's still hope, even in the darkest war." The firelight danced between them, and silence filled the air, not of sadness, but of peace. When dawn came, the Empress stood before her people with Daniel by her side. She looked at the faces, humans, aliens, children, all living together without fear. "This is what he fought for," she said proudly. "Not empires, not power, but peace." The crowd bowed their heads, and for the first time in centuries, two worlds and once enemies and stood as one. Later, when the stars appeared again, the Empress and Daniel stood at the edge of the valley. "I thought I lost you," she whispered. "You never did," he said softly. "You just had to look up." She smiled, tears shining in her eyes. "Then stay, Daniel. Not as a soldier, but as the man who taught me how to be human." He took her hand, and together they watched the twin suns rise. The universe, once cruel and divided, seemed at peace again, and in that quiet moment, where light met shadow, and love overcame fear, the story of the Empress and the human soldier finally came full circle.